On a quiet evening, Ava sat in her living room, scrolling through old photos on her phone. Her husband, Daniel, was on another business trip, and the silence of their suburban home had started to feel suffocating. They had been married for 12 years, and while their life together seemed perfect from the outside, something had changed over the past few months. Daniel had been traveling more frequently, and there were times when she couldn't reach him for hours. Eva's friends told her it was just the stress of his job, but a gnawing feeling in her gut told her otherwise. It wasn't until she was cleaning out the attic one weekend that she found the first clue, an old receipt tucked inside a jacket pocket Daniel had left behind. The receipt was from a small cafe in Denver, a place Daniel had never mentioned visiting. Curiosity piqued, she decided to investigate further. Over the next few weeks, Eva quietly collected more signs: credit card bills with charges she couldn't explain, hotel stays in cities Daniel had supposedly never been to, and a string of strange calls that ended as soon as she picked up. The puzzle pieces didn't add up, and Eva's unease grew. Finally, unable to bear the suspicion any longer, she decided to take a risk. She hired a private investigator. What came back was more than Eva could have ever imagined. Daniel wasn't just away for work. He had a second family, another wife, another home, in another state entirely. Her heart raced as she read the investigator's report. The details were clear. Daniel had been living a double life, splitting his time between Eva and a woman named Rachel, whom he had married 10 years ago. They had 2 children together, a boy and a girl. Ava could hardly believe the words she was reading. Her husband of 12 years had another life, a completely different existence where she and her love had no part. Ava sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours, her mind replaying every moment she had ever spent with Daniel, every lie he had told, every excuse he had made for his absences, and now all the pieces fit together. The late nights, the unexplained trips, the emotional distance. She decided not to confront him right away. She needed time to think, to plan. For a few weeks she lived as though nothing had changed, wearing the mask of a devoted wife while her heart crumbled inside. She had thought about leaving him, packing her bags, and vanishing from his life as suddenly as this nightmare had entered hers. But that felt too easy, too clean. Daniel didn't deserve to walk away from this unscathed. One Friday evening, while Daniel was away again, Eva booked a flight to Denver. If her husband had built a life there, she wanted to see it for herself. When she arrived, it didn't take long to find the house. It was in a quiet neighborhood, a home not too different from the one they shared. Ava parked across the street and watched, and there he was, Daniel, laughing with a woman in the driveway, a small girl clinging to his leg. He looked so at ease, so natural, a loving husband and father. Ava's breath caught in her throat. The man she had loved and trusted for over a decade was a stranger. She snapped a picture with her phone and left, tears blurring her vision as she sped away. Back in her hotel room, Ava sat on the bed, staring at the photo. How could he do this? She had so many questions, but she wasn't sure she wanted the answers. The next step was clear to her now. She would confront Daniel, but not in anger or grief. No, she would unravel his lies as carefully as he had spun them. This wasn't just about their marriage anymore. It was about control. He had taken it from her for far too long, and now it was her turn. When Daniel returned from his trip a few days later, Ava was waiting. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply laid the photo on the kitchen table, watching his face as he realized his secret was out. The color drained from his cheeks, and for the first time in their marriage, Daniel had no words. "Who is she?" Eva asked, her voice steady. He stammered, unable to meet her gaze. "I want the truth, Daniel. Everything." For the next few hours, Daniel confessed. How it had started as a mistake. How he had been too afraid to tell her the truth. How he had convinced himself that he could live both lives without consequence. He told her about Rachel, the children, and how every lie he told had pulled him deeper into a web he couldn't escape. Eva listened in silence, her heart breaking with each word. When he was done, she stood, her decision made. "You're going to leave her. You're going to leave them, or I'm walking out of this house tonight. If you want to try and save this marriage, you'll end it with them. Now." Daniel's eyes widened in shock, but he didn't argue. He knew he had no right. That night, he packed a bag and left for Denver. He promised to return and make things right. But Eva wasn't sure if she believed him anymore. What she did know, though, was that she had regained control. And no matter what happened next, she would never be the same woman again. The next few days after Daniel's departure passed in a blur for Eva. She didn't hear from him, not a single call or text. Part of her had hoped for some explanation, some desperate plea for forgiveness, but the silence only deepened her resolve. She had given him an ultimatum, and now she had to wait. One evening, as she sat by the window staring into the darkened street, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "I ended things. Coming home tomorrow." Eva felt a strange mix of relief and dread. It was the response she had demanded, but the thought of facing him now, knowing what he was capable of, left her feeling hollow. She couldn't deny that her heart had hardened since uncovering the truth. The love she once felt for him had been shattered, replaced with something far colder. Now, it was about seeing what remained, if anything. The following afternoon, Daniel arrived. Eva met him at the door, her face impassive. He looked worn, his usual confident demeanor stripped away. Without a word, she stepped aside, letting him in. They stood in the entryway for a moment, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. "I ended it," Daniel repeated, as if saying it out loud would somehow make it real. "Rachel, the kids. I told them everything, that I couldn't continue living this lie." Eva studied his face, searching for any sign of regret or hesitation, but his eyes were tired, empty. He had done what she asked, but it didn't feel like a victory. She turned away, walking into the living room without responding, and Daniel followed her. Sitting across from each other, the distance between them felt more than just physical. Eva finally broke the silence. "And what now, Daniel? Do you expect me to just forget everything? Pretend none of this ever happened?" "I don't know," he said quietly. "I don't know what I expect, but I want to make it right. I want to fix things with us. If you'll let me." His voice cracked at the end, a small plea for mercy that didn't move her. She had heard enough promises over the years to know they meant little now. The betrayal was too deep, the lies too numerous. Could she ever trust him again? For a long time, neither of them spoke. The weight of their shared silence felt like an oppressive force, pressing down on them both. "I don't know if we can fix this," Eva said finally, her voice low but firm. "What you've done, it's unforgivable, Daniel. You had a whole other family, children. You built a life with someone else while you were still living this one. How am I supposed to come back from that?" Daniel's face crumpled. "I know I've hurt you. I can't take it back. But I love you, Eva. I've always loved you. I don't know how I got to this point, but I swear, I want to make things right between us." Eva stood, pacing the room. She felt a knot of anger rising inside her, twisting her insides. It wasn't just about what Daniel had done. It was about the years of deception, the ease with which he had lied to her face. Every business trip, every late-night excuse, every unanswered call, it was all tainted now. "I don't even know who you are anymore," she said, turning to face him. "Everything I thought I knew about you, about us, it's gone." "I'm still the same man, Eva," he pleaded. "I made mistakes, horrible mistakes, but I'm still me. I've always loved you." "No." She shook her head, her voice rising. "The man I married would never have done this. He would never have lived a lie for so long, never betrayed me this deeply. That man doesn't exist anymore." Daniel dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders slumping in defeat. For a moment, Eva felt a twinge of pity, but it was fleeting. He had made his choices, and now they were both living with the consequences. "I can't just forgive you," she said after a long pause. "Not like this. I need time, space. I don't even know if I want to stay in this marriage anymore." Daniel looked up at her, his eyes red and raw. "I'll give you time, as much as you need. Just don't give up on us, Eva, please." She didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. That night, Daniel slept in the guest room. Eva lay awake in their bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the fragments of her life. She had once built her world around him, and now that world was crumbling. In the weeks that followed, they lived like strangers under the same roof. Daniel made efforts, small gestures of reconciliation, but Eva remained distant, her heart too shattered to be repaired so easily. She went through the motions of daily life, but inside, she was still grappling with the enormity of what had been revealed. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Daniel broke the silence again. "I've been thinking," he said hesitantly. Maybe we should sell the house. Start fresh somewhere new. I'll do whatever it takes, Eva. Whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm committed to this." Eva stared at him, her expression unreadable. She had been thinking too, but her thoughts had taken a different turn. "I don't think a new house is going to fix this," she said quietly. "I don't know if anything can." Daniel's face fell, but he nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "What do you want to do, then?" Eva looked at him, the weight of her decision settling over her. She had spent so long trying to hold on to the life they had built, even after the truth had come out. But now, she realized that the life she had known was gone, and no amount of pretending could bring it back. "I think we need to separate," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I need time to figure out who I am without you, Daniel. And you need to figure out what kind of man you really are." For a moment, Daniel didn't respond, his eyes wide with shock, but then he nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered, "but I understand." Eva stood, her heart heavy but resolute. "You already lost me, Daniel. Now, it's time for me to find myself again." Eva packed her things with deliberate calm, her movements slow and measured, as if each item she folded was a part of her old life she was saying goodbye to. The weight of her decision sat heavily in the air, but for the first time in months, Eva felt a strange sense of relief. There was clarity now. No more doubts, no more unanswered questions. She had made her choice. Daniel hovered near the doorway, watching her with a mixture of sadness and resignation. He had tried in small, quiet ways to convince her to stay, but deep down, he knew this moment was inevitable. "Where will you go?" he asked softly. Eva paused, a sweater in her hands, and turned to look at him. "I don't know yet. Maybe back to my sister's for a while. I need space to think, to rebuild. Daniel nodded, his eyes downcast. I wish things had been different. So do I, she replied, her voice steady but devoid of the emotion that once tied her to him. But we can't go back, Daniel. You made your choices. Now we have to live with them. As she zipped up her suitcase, a long silence stretched between them. There were no more words left to say, no more apologies to be made. Daniel had lost the right to those long ago. When Eva finally walked down the stairs and out the front door, she didn't look back. The house behind her, once filled with memories of love, now felt like a stranger's. The life they had built together was over. She could feel it in every step she took, and though her heart ached, she knew this was the only path forward. The fresh air hit her face as she walked to her car, her mind racing with what lay ahead. Freedom, uncertainty, the unknown. But for the first time in a long time, Eva felt like she was in control. The weight of Daniel's betrayal had lifted, and with it, she felt something else. Hope. As she started the car, she glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were tired, but there was a spark there, one that hadn't been there in months. She smiled faintly, a small but real sign of life returning to her. The road ahead was long, but it was hers to take now. Months passed, and Eva slowly rebuilt her life. She moved into a small apartment across town, keeping her distance from the familiar streets where she and Daniel had shared their life. The separation, though painful, was necessary. With each passing day, she found herself again, piece by piece. Eva threw herself into work, took up new hobbies, and even began making new friends. The process was slow, and there were still nights when the weight of what had happened pressed down on her. But she was moving forward. She had stopped checking in on Daniel's life, no longer curious about what he was doing or if he had tried to repair the mess he had made in Denver. That chapter was closed. One day, as she sat in a cafe, sipping coffee and reading a book, her phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. Hesitant, she picked it up. Hello? Ava, it's Rachel. Eva froze, the name sending a chill down her spine. She had never spoken to Rachel, the other woman in Daniel's life. They were strangers bound by a shared betrayal, and though Eva had often thought of her, she had never imagined they would speak. Rachel, Eva said slowly, her mind racing. How did you get my number? I found it in Daniel's phone, Rachel replied, her voice steady, but laced with a sadness Eva immediately recognized. I needed to talk to you. Eva swallowed, unsure of what to say. What could either of them possibly say to make sense of this tangled mess? Still, she stayed on the line. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, Rachel continued, but I thought you should know. I ended things with Daniel, too. The words hit Eva like a punch. You did? Yes, Rachel said quietly. I found out everything, about you, about the lies. I couldn't believe he had been living a double life all this time. I confronted him, and he admitted it. I ended it right then. Eva was silent, processing the flood of emotions that came with this revelation. She felt a strange sense of solidarity with Rachel, a woman who had been just as deceived, just as betrayed. I'm sorry, Rachel said after a pause. I didn't know about you, about your life together. I feel like a fool. It wasn't your fault, Eva replied, surprising herself with the sincerity of her words. Daniel, he's good at lying, at making you believe whatever he wants. Rachel let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, he is. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of their shared experiences hanging in the air between them. It was a strange, unspoken bond, forged by the man who had betrayed them both. "I don't know where to go from here," Rachel admitted finally. "I feel like I've lost everything." "You haven't," Eva said softly. "It doesn't feel like it now, but you'll find yourself again. You'll rebuild. I'm still working on it, but it gets easier." Rachel sighed. "Thank you, Eva. I didn't expect this call to go like this, but thank you." They said their goodbyes, and as Eva hung up the phone, she felt a surprising sense of closure, not just for her, but for Rachel too. They had both been victims of Daniel's lies, but they were also survivors. Eva leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain. She had her life back. And that, more than anything, was the victory she had been searching for. As she finished her coffee and stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun, Eva felt lighter than she had in years. She had found herself again, and in doing so, she had freed herself from the past. Whatever came next, she was ready. With her head held high, Eva walked into her new life, knowing that the hardest part was behind her. She was free.